good morning, everybody.
Great. Over to you to get us going.
Thank you very much indeed, and welcome to everybody. This is a very exciting initiative of ASSAf. I think that one of the things that we are all acutely aware of at the moment is the infodemic of information, some of which is accurate and some of which is not accurate. And what we're going to try and do in this seminar is address some of those matters, but we're doing it between two major players in the scientific world in terms of COVID, but both for South Africa and for our colleagues from China. This is going to be a very, very interesting, and we don't do enough of this, have these inter-country dialogues to really understand different perspectives. So we first are going to have a series of introductions from three of our colleagues, and then we'll have two experts who I'll introduce subsequently to give us some keynote addresses and to start our Q&A. In terms of Q&A, you'll see everybody who's on the call that there's a Q&A box, and we'll encourage you to put your Q&As into that box. So with this, I'll introduce our first colleague who will make some introductory remarks, who's Mr. Dan du Toit. And then I'll introduce our other colleagues as well. So, Mr. du Toit.
Thank you very much, Professor Rees, for that introduction, and good morning to everyone on behalf of the South African Department of Science and Innovation, and specifically a warm welcome to all our friends who are joining us from China for this very important event. My first task this morning is just really to bring you the good wishes of my minister, Dr. Blayton Nzimande, South Africa's Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation. Minister Nzimande, of course, follows very closely the collaboration not only between South Africa and China, but indeed the scientific response from the South African science system to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the very important role played by our Academy of Science. I briefed the minister again last night on today's program. He would have very much wanted to join us, but unfortunately is engaged in other government business today. And he had asked me, Minister Councillor Lee, to specifically ask you to convey his best wishes and appreciation to Ambassador Chen for the Chinese Embassy in South Africa's strong commitment to this very important strategic cooperation, and also to you, Professor Sujal, and to Professor Janssen, his appreciation for the role ASSAf is playing in providing a platform for this very important debate we will be having today. Just very briefly from the Department of Science and Innovation, why this event is so important for three key reasons. First and foremost, if we are going to defeat the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm not only talking about the public health challenge, but also the economic impact, we need to make sure our response is based on authoritative and accurate scientific advice. So any effort to debunk the myths and misconceptions must be an important part of that process. But secondly, it's not only the public health and economic challenges, but we also know that COVID-19 has put in danger global solidarity and multilateralism, values which are very important for the South African and Chinese governments. And we have to make absolutely sure also within that context that science is not instrumentalized as a political instrument for undermining political solidarity and integration between the countries and regions of our world. So we think that this topic could not be more relevant. But secondly, this is also exactly the type of event which brings to the fore the very crucial role the Academy of Science of South Africa is playing in making sure that as a government, we receive authoritative scientific advice from South Africa's scientific community, drawing on the best scientific expertise, but also not only scientific advice to government, but also informing the public debate, public discourse, enhancing public understanding of science. So we would again like to congratulate Professor Sujal on this effort. This also provides us with a platform, these type of events for profiling South Africa's scientists, and we are proud and privileged to be able to draw on the likes of Professor Rees, which I should acknowledge, but then certainly also Professor Salim Abdul Karim, who continues to do South Africa proud as a representative in many global science forums. And Professor Karim, please also accept our congratulations on also behalf on the minister on your recent election to an important leadership position in the International Science Council. But this event and the partnership with the Chinese Academy of Science also just demonstrate to us the important role the Academy of Science is playing globally. And we certainly look forward to see the relationship between the Academy of Science of South Africa and the Chinese Academy of Science grow strength to strength. But then thirdly, I cannot conclude but emphasizing just this is so important because this event just deepens the strategic partnership South Africa and China enjoys. Science, technology, and innovation is a crucial component of that partnership. We collaborate in many, many different areas. And right from the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're also very grateful that the Ministry of Science and Technology in China responded and proposed to South Africa many important partnership initiatives. For example, we are very encouraged by the ongoing collaboration on traditional medicine and the links with South Africa's indigenous knowledge systems. But not only does South Africa and China work together bilaterally, we have also crucial partners in various multilateral forums. And indeed, if the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa partnership responded concertedly for scientific collaboration in the face of challenges of COVID-19, that is in no small part due to the leadership which China has provided on initiatives such as, for example, the BRICS vaccine R&D center. And then just lastly, and I've already emphasized the point, the links between our countries. It's not only scientific, it's not only economic, it's not only political, but it's all about people and to people. And we know that concept of people-to-people collaboration is so important for China. And we see again this event today where we come together, where we can have robust debate, robust interrogation, and I certainly look forward from the Department of Science and Innovation's perspective to that debate that will just further seek really to make sure that that role of science, that for science to unite, science doesn't divide, the pursuit of scientific excellence, of scientific proof brings people together. And this is what we are really expecting from today's event. So from the Department of Science and Innovation, again, our deep appreciation to Ambassador Chen, Minister Councillor Li, and the team at the Chinese Embassy for their support for this event, to Professor Sujal and the team at ASSAf, congratulations, and our appreciation for making sure you continue to remain firmly committed to this vision of ASSAf to make sure that science serves our society. Thank you, Professor Rees, and I look forward to the rest of the proceedings this morning.
Thank you very much. And just to acknowledge that Mr. Dan Du Toit has really built a reputation for his innovation around cooperation with other countries in science and technology. And clearly this is a growing field from what you've just told us. So thank you very much, Dan. I'm going to now introduce Professor Himla Sudal, who is the Executive Officer at ASSAf, and she's been there since 2018, but she's perhaps best known for her extraordinary work looking at DNA in sub-Saharan Africa, and many projects around the movement of people that have developed from her work. But I just would like to sort of appreciate the South African Academy of Science that is really growing in its stature from the time I think that I first became a member of the Academy. I think we've all seen the role it's playing in community dialogue, scientific dialogue, regional and now global dialogue. So with that, Professor Himla Sudal, Himla, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Rees. And good morning to one and all. It is indeed a pleasure for us to be hosting this joint initiative with the Embassy of China in South Africa in partnership with the Chinese Academy of Science. So greetings to the Minister, Councillor, and all colleagues, part and parcel of the CAS and the Embassy, as well as our South African colleagues from ASSAf, most notably Professor Rees for agreeing to moderate the session, and our representative of ASSAf, Professor Karim, who will be representing the ASSAf voice later in the program. Colleagues, a couple of years ago, ASSAf found an opportunity of starting an embassy lecture series. And we believe that this gave us an opportunity to have a partnership with the various embassies based in South Africa, so that we could use these sorts of collaborations to bring together our scientists from South Africa and the partner country represented by the embassy. We've had several very, very successful workshops and lecture series, and it was most gracious when we engaged with the Chinese embassy that we could agree on hosting our very first embassy lecture with the Chinese embassy in South Africa. And as Professor Rees has said, it's a very important subject that we are going to be discussing today. And I am sure, as Don DeToy has said, that we meet on many portals, for example, the BRICS academies as well. And we have had major partnerships previously with the CAS and facilitated by the embassy. So I'm convinced that this will not be our first engagement, and we will find more opportunities of bringing the scientists together from both of our countries. So with that, Chairperson, I look forward to the engagement that will ensue. And from my side, I want to welcome one and all to this webinar. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Again, congratulations for your leadership of our Academy of Science. It's very exciting in what we're seeing happening these days. And it gives me great pleasure now to introduce Mr. Li Zigang, who is the Minister in the Embassy of the People's Republic of China to South Africa. Li has been working since 1995 in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's familiar with this part of the world because I see that you've also served in Namibia. So thank you very much, and a real appreciation for you to reach out to this. I think you're talking also on behalf of the Chinese Academy of Science, and these kind of linkages just grow global understanding, which is so much needed at the moment. So thank you so much, and let me invite you to make a few words.
Thank you so much, Professor Helen Rees. Actually, I agree totally with the first two speakers, Mr. Don DeToy and Professor Humans Sudel. Actually, the world is changing very fast. In this changing world, the only thing that is certain is uncertainty. So with this situation, we have to anchor ourselves in what you have said: dialogue, cooperation, solidarity, and the people. We work for the people and work with the help of the people. So distinguished Professor Salim, Abdul, Karim, and distinguished Professor George Gao, ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinguished honor and privilege to address this exceptional audience. In cooperation with the Academy of Science of China and South Africa, the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in Pretoria is co-hosting this important webinar to debunk the myths and misconceptions of COVID-19 and to share with you, our audience, the perspectives both from China and from South Africa. As late Stephen Hawking has famously remarked, I quote, "The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge," end quote. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic at the end of 2019, the world has been plagued by all kinds of myths and misconceptions about COVID-19. However, despite the fact that scientists and the medical professionals all around the world have been forced to fight a war at the same time on two fronts. One is against the biological virus, the other is against the virus of misinformation and mischievous intentions. We could still be expecting to see light at the end of the tunnel. And I would like to share with you a few of my own observations of what I would term as 5H in this brutal and breathtaking war against the pandemic. And they are human, health, help, hope, and heroes. First, human. Human suffers from this pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to nearly 5 million deaths and more than 240 million confirmed cases worldwide, and presents an unprecedented challenge to people's work and livelihoods. The economic and social disruption caused by the pandemic is devastating the African continent in particular. It has faced its first economic recession in 25 years, and tens of millions of people are at risk of falling back into extreme poverty. This pandemic has also been affecting food security, public health, employment, labor issues, children's health, safety, and education all around the world. Second, health. Health capacity growth in this pandemic. The capacity growth has been dramatic in our health knowledge and medical toolbox, specifically for the one to fight against this pandemic. Back to early 2020, the current virus is totally unheard of. Until now, we still do not know where it originated. Confronted with this unknown virus, China did its utmost to identify the virus in a record short time, share the genetic sequence, and send alerts in a rapid manner to the world. South African scientists detected new variants of this virus and sent alarm to the world without delay. Global scientists worked together and successfully developed multiple COVID-19 vaccines, also at an unprecedented speed. More and more medicines and ammunition to fight this virus, to fight this war, have been coming forth while we are doing the battle. In the long run of human social development history, infectious diseases have always been an existential threat. The outbreak of this pandemic is a natural disaster. We have made a great progress with the help of science, technology, and human innovation to beat this enemy. And in the meantime, the world moves forward as a whole. The scientific spirit of seeking truth and being pragmatic is the key force to defeat the epidemic. The first phase of global COVID-19 origin tracing, cooperation between World Health Organization and China and its research practice provides a model for similar cooperation in the future in other countries around the world. Future investigations should be conducted based on what we have known during the first phase of investigation by WHO and look for more possible early cases in a wider range and in multiple places in the world, rather than focusing on only one country. In addition, nobody should be condemned due to the first detection of a new virus. If blame should be indeed laid on someone, it should be on those who are negligent in tackling the pandemic, leading to unnecessary and preventable loss of precious lives and livelihoods. Third, help. Help matters in this pandemic. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, China and South Africa have been united with each other, fighting as one against the epidemic. The governments and the peoples of our two countries, we are brothers and comrades in arms, not only in the past, but at the present and in the future, have provided strong support and assistance to each other, both material and moral. And the Chinese government is ready to further work and is ready to coordinate with South Africa fighting against this pandemic, and is ready to do more in terms of PPE, vaccines, and vaccine research and production, both bilaterally and within the framework of BRICS, to cope with the current crisis and to make the world a better place for every one of us. We must stay in solidarity. Fourth, hope. Hope stands in front of us in face of the COVID-19. Solidarity and cooperation are the main melody, as well as our most powerful weapon. I would regard those misinformation and misconception as kind of intermezzo in this performance. Where hope flourishes, fear will be fear no more. China will work with South Africa and Africa as a whole to uphold the UN-centered global governance system and supports World Health Organization in making greater contribution to the global COVID-19 responses. We oppose politicization and stigmatization of the virus, and we oppose racial discrimination and ideological bias. We stand firm for equity and justice in the world, just as President Xi Jinping concluded an extraordinary China-Africa summit on solidarity against COVID-19. Humanity will ultimately defeat the virus, and that the Chinese and African people are poised to embrace better days ahead. Last but not least, heroes. Heroes stand at the forefront fighting the pandemic. Today, I would like to commend and express my highest gratitude to all frontline scientists and health workers who are saving and protecting lives around the clock despite the risk of infection, exhaustion from overwork, physical and psychological molestation at the hands of those unknowing or unaware of the scientific truth, and those incited by misinformation and myths. Thank you. Thank you for the hard work, great sacrifice, and above all, for the role model of care and courage. In the face of science and human courage, fear will be fear no more. I thank you all.
Thank you so much. I mean, that was quite inspiring, and I hadn't seen the 5 H's before, but I've written them down and I'm going to use them. But I mean, of all of what you said, the one thing I feel that a dialogue like this really does represent is solidarity and sharing. So thank you very much, Mr. Li Jigang, sorry. I'm going to now introduce both of our 2 speakers. And I think they are so well known that they probably don't, either of them, require introduction, but I'm delighted to say they're both good colleagues of mine. I'm going to introduce both of them now so that they can run their talks one after another without interruption. And as they're doing their talks, please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A. So the first presenter will be Professor Salim Abdul Karim, who very simply put, is a South African epidemiologist, but he is, as you know, much more than that. Salim has really built his career around HIV, particularly HIV prevention, vaccines, antibodies, and the interface with TB in particular. And that's what he was best known for before COVID. But then he became the chair of our MAC and became one of the country's best scientific communicators. He's on the boards of many prestigious journals. He's received many awards. I'm not going to list them all, but both for science and for things such as communication. I would like to introduce Salim, who will be giving his perspective on misinformation and how we can tackle this. The second speaker is Professor George Gao, who is, apart from being a member, an eminent member of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, is the Director General of the Chinese CDC, Chinese Disease Control and Prevention. He's a professor in the Institute of Microbiology at the Chinese Academy of Sciences and a professor of the Chinese Society of Biotechnology. And he's president of the Asian Federation of Biotechnology. Not on this, but the one thing I will mention about George is that he and I co-chair a global committee between CEPI and Chinese CDC. So I have I'm sure he chairs a lot more meetings than we've got on his bio here. But I think importantly for what George is going to focus on, his research has been focused on envelope virus entry and release, and especially influenza. But he's also been interested in virus ecology, especially the relationship between the influenza virus and migratory birds or live poultry markets and bat-derived virus ecology. He was also involved in the Chinese CDC team that went to West Africa when the Ebola outbreak in West Africa occurred. He also, as with Salim, is the recipient of many international and national awards. and is eminently placed to give us his perspective on, what's going on out there and how do we address the myths and misinformation, but what still is the research agenda, of which we know there is a huge research agenda. So with that, just a reminder, it's the Q&A that we would like you to put your questions into. I'll introduce Professor Salim Abdul Karim to make the first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a great pleasure and an honor for me to be here with you today. And I'm particularly pleased to be here with two of my wonderful colleagues, both Professor George Gao and Professor Helen Rees. It's a great honor. To you, Minister Ambassador Lee, and to Professor Sudyal, thank you very much for hosting this meeting. What I want to do in the 20 minutes I have available is I hope to share with you some perspectives on the issues relating to debunking some of the myths and misconceptions that are quite common around COVID-19, both in South Africa and indeed in many other parts of the world. So I will briefly touch on where we are in South Africa in the pandemic, and I thought that's just to give context for our Chinese colleagues. And then I will deal with 5 myths. I'll talk about COVID-19 is sometimes claimed to be just like flu. There are some that claim ivermectin prevents and cures COVID-19. There are some people who say, scientists that say that public health interventions don't work. And there are many myths around vaccines. I'll just provide 15 myths and deal with them. I might not deal with them individually, but just mention them. And then I'll deal with the last myth is once vaccinated, we can just go back to normal. And then I'll make some concluding remarks. So that's what I hope to cover with you in the course of today's presentation. So when we look at the epidemic in South Africa, we have now completed 3 waves. The initial wave was driven by the D614G variant, our second wave by the Beta variant, and the third wave by the Delta variant. What's interesting is that between each of these waves, we have a period of between 94 and 99 days. That was roughly 3 months where we have low transmission. And during those periods, even though we release most of our restrictions, we do not see even major outbreaks or even small outbreaks. We have, during those periods, a period of quiescence. And we are in such a period right now. And if this trend continues, then what we can expect is that after about 3 months, we may see a 4th wave. Whether we see a 4th wave will be, to a large extent, dependent on whether there's a new variant. And at this point, there are some indications of new variants emerging, but none that have really been able to outcompete the Delta variant. So at this stage, we can say that we've completed the 3 waves, we're in quiescence, and we may have a 4th wave. And if past trends continue, we're likely to see that at the end of December. So let's deal with myth 1. COVID-19 is just like flu, and there have been several individuals who've claimed that. I've given you some examples, including doctors who've claimed that it's nothing more than the flu. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. The latest estimates by this major study undertaken by The Economist shows that in terms of excess deaths, there are somewhere between 9.3 million and 15.2 million excess deaths across the world. Now we have, in terms of reported COVID-19 deaths, they are about 5 million. But if you look at the comparison between the official global COVID-19 deaths that are reported, it's at 4.5 million. When this analysis was done, it's closer now to 5 million. And you can see the difference between the two. Globally, the difference is about 3.3-fold. In other words, there are about 3.3 deaths for every reported COVID-19 deaths. And within South Africa, it's about 2.9-fold. And you can see that several countries have far higher excess deaths than they do reported COVID-19 deaths. So what we know is that certainly official COVID-19 deaths is 5 million. is 5 million more than we should have. It is nothing like what you would see from flu epidemics. But COVID-19 is more than just a viral infection. If you look at 5 of its major global impacts, the World Bank estimates that as many as 150 million more people are now extremely poor following the pandemic. In terms of hunger, the World Food Programme estimates that there are 161 million more people that are now food insecure and are going hungry each day. And in terms of this pandemic, it has created other epidemics, one of which is the infodemic, where we have seen all kinds of claims that are being made, especially in uncurated social media. And we see how political instability and protest have been fostered in the course of COVID-19 restrictions. But for me, one of the biggest challenges is the way this pandemic has increased disparities in race, gender, data access, and indeed vaccine access. So let me deal with myth 2, which is that ivermectin prevents and cures COVID-19. And there are many individuals who've claimed that. Many of them have been medical individuals. And we've seen the impact of that in several countries, our own included. And in the US, one indicator is how prescriptions for ivermectin rose by over 1,000% in January 2021 compared to January 2020. Well, let's look at what the combined evidence tells us. The most authoritative voice in terms of looking at meta-analyses, bringing the available evidence together, is the Cochrane Collaboration. And the Cochrane analysis shows that in their review, which is a systematic review, they found 14 small studies, many of low quality. 9 were inpatient studies, 4 outpatient, and 1 was a prevention study. The overall number of study participants was 1,678. And their overall conclusion is that all of the evidence does not support the use of ivermectin for treatment or prevention of COVID-19. Now, it should be pointed out that many of the claims that are being made of ivermectin stem from one of the very first studies that were done with ivermectin, a study done in Egypt, which reported 90% efficacy of ivermectin. And it took a University of London master's student to actually look at the data with a fine-tooth comb, and he found that there was duplication of individual patient information, and in some instances, incoherent data. So what we're seeing is a situation where the original study that drove the misconception of ivermectin's efficacy was actually involved possibly with scientific fraud. This preprint has been withdrawn, but already has had 150,000 views. So it's been quite influential, even though it's now withdrawn as a preprint. And it's never been published, of course, never been peer reviewed. And of course, the real concern is that individuals are being influenced about data that actually might be scientifically fraudulent. So we are in a situation where we have data, but importantly, we're now seeing, if you look at today's New England Journal of Medicine, hot off the press, I literally made the slide this morning. There's an article by Temple and colleagues that look at the toxic effects of ivermectin use. And they show several findings, and what they conclude, there is insufficient evidence to support the use of ivermectin to treat or prevent COVID-19, and improper use, as well as the possible occurrence of medication interactions, may result in serious side effects requiring hospitalization. So we're seeing that it's not just neutral, that individuals are being, that ivermectin is being promoted by people within the profession. And especially because there's no need for ivermectin. There are many now, we have good evidence of at least 4 effective treatments. We saw from the original recovery trials the benefit of dexamethasone. We've seen the Regeneron combinations, marked effect in terms of reduced mortality. And of course, we've seen the benefits of tocilizumab, the IL-6 effect. And of course, most recently, we've seen how Merck has provided a press release on the benefits of molnupiravir. Now, molnupiravir, we don't know all the details, and I'm not one that generally just accepts, drug company press releases. But for now, they suggest that there's a 50% reduction in mortality and in mild and moderate disease from COVID-19. So we look forward to seeing what it is. We've just seen the first abstract, and we hope that it's going to appear, that the paper will appear in the NEJM within the next week or two. But importantly, science has not only showed us about what are effective treatments to reduce the impact of COVID-19, reduce hospitalization, prevent deaths. We've also seen several treatments, go into the dustbin because there's now pretty compelling evidence that they don't work, whether it's azithromycin. I don't know if you saw it this week, the latest studies on interferon showed that they have no benefit. Originally hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, high-dose zinc, convalescent plasma, Kaletra, all of them have now been thrown into the dustbin in terms of they have no benefits in COVID-19. So let me deal with myth 3 very quickly. And that is that public health interventions don't work. Governments simply use them as authoritarian control of the citizens, depriving them of their rights. Now, one has to admit that public health interventions in many instances deprive people of their rights, their right of movement and so on. So that is a concern. But as we look at the effects of some of the public health interventions, and I've chosen here just to look at early lockdowns, we've now seen in the latest report that was released about 2 weeks ago from the House of Commons in the UK, this was the 6th report from the 2 committees that have looked at the issues of the way in which the UK government has handled the pandemic. And what they have concluded is that there was groupthink, and that the government was not enough, it wasn't open to approaches that were being taken elsewhere, like early lockdowns, border controls, and effective test and treat, as they should have been implemented in the UK. For those who are not familiar, that at the very early stages of the epidemic, the UK chose not to go into public health interventions, whereas in South Africa, for example, we declared a national state of disaster and went into public health interventions very early. Neil Ferguson, who originally sat on the SAGE in the UK, his analysis showed that delaying the lockdown in the UK just by 1 week, it would have halved the number of deaths that occurred in April last year. So there's certainly, from all the evidence we're seeing, there's benefits to public health interventions. And of course, there are many, many studies that have been undertaken. Studies that have shown, for example, the benefits of face masks, the benefits, and huge systematic reviews that show the benefits of physical distancing. And there's also within the Lancet Commission, on which George and I serve, we have also done many meta-analyses looking at public health measures, and there's little doubt that the evidence points strongly in the direction that they are highly efficacious, particularly when used in combinations. So let me go now to myth 4. In myth 4, we are dealing here with the issue of vaccination, and there are 15 myths. I mean, I just wrote down 15 myths that I've received queries on, or people have communicated with me, and there are many, many more. And I'm not going to go through them. I'll just provide the slides so that they are available. But myths like the vaccines contain a microchip that can track and control people. And, just many people have died when they've received the vaccines, and it goes on. And I've listed the first 5, and I've listed several more. And I provide you with these 15 so that you can look at them in due course. So let me deal with myth 5, that once vaccinated, we can go back to normal. Now, it's no question that when you think that we obtain the first genetic sequence of the virus from our colleagues in China, on the 11th of January. And remember, it was first put out on Twitter. I mean, when I first learned this, I said, goodness, who puts major scientific discoveries on Twitter? I thought that's for adolescents, but it turns out, you know, that's the world of science these days. We are moving in not only journals, we want fast communication, but that was critical because it laid the foundation for the first vaccines. And who would have guessed that within the first 9 months, we would have seen a trial emerge from Pfizer-BioNTech that showed that their vaccine made on the mRNA platform was effective. And remember, this was a major multinational effort. It involved a collaboration between several countries, the US, Turkey, Germany, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina. This trial was done across all of these different countries. And of course, since those first results we saw on the 9th of November, we now have several vaccines that have been shown to be effective. But we had hoped that once we have an effective vaccine, we can just vaccinate the world and go back to normal. Unfortunately, the emergence of variants, we saw the first announcement on the 14th of December by the UK government of the Alpha variant. South Africa followed shortly thereafter, announcing the discovery of the Beta variant. Our colleagues in Brazil shared with the world the Gamma variant. And of course, India initially talked about the double mutant, which subsequently we now know as the Delta variant. And of course, we don't know what the next variant might look like. Well, the impact of variants have changed our perceptions, because if you look at this picture of India, Brazil, and South Africa and their first waves, you can see the impact of their first waves. In India, for example, they had a very mild first wave and thought, in fact, you even heard comments that they've conquered this virus. But look at the impact of variants. In India, the Delta variant drove the second wave. The Gamma variant led to an enormous increase in cases in Brazil. And of course, in South Africa, we've had the Beta and Delta variants drive each of our waves. And now we've seen and we understand the implications of some of these variants. They are enormous, and we understand that they are impacting on our understanding of the COVID-19 endgame, and that we really need to move beyond where we are now, better understanding of correlates of protection if we are to better appreciate what the potential impact of future variants is going to be. So let me conclude by sharing with you what I think is a key lesson from HIV for COVID-19. And that is the importance of mutual interdependence. And let me quote to you from a report by UNAIDS. And this report is written about how AIDS changed everything. It's a UNAIDS report, and I'll quote, "The AIDS movement demonstrates that with a shared vision, shared responsibility, and through global solidarity and leadership of people living with HIV-affected communities and individual action, we can change the course of history." And indeed we have. From a disease that was universally fatal, you can be in the most remote village in Africa and you will have access to free antiretroviral treatment. And that comes to us through global solidarity. The Global Fund, PEPFAR, UNITAID, all of these are mechanisms for rich countries to help poor countries so that HIV is dealt with at a global level. We tried to do the same with COVAX, created by the World Health Organization, CEPI, and Gavi, to create vaccine equity. Instead, we have seen gross vaccine inequity. And I would like to share with you that for me, one of the biggest myths of all is that you can put out a fire by dousing half its flame. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to share with you a video that was made by the World Health Organization, and one that I believe shows very clearly how we are failing in our efforts to deal with the pandemic as a pandemic. And I'm not sure if the technology will work, but let's try. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Salim. That was a tour de force once again. And, you know, you reminded me of sitting in, I think, of January of 2020 in a big WHO meeting with our Chinese scientific colleagues all on screen surrounding us. And at the end of that meeting, somebody came in and said, we've got the name, it's COVID. It's going to be COVID-19. But, you know, we were in that level of dialogue, that intense dialogue was ongoing from the very first. And absolutely, I think hats off to the Chinese scientists who were so on the ball and shared that data so early. It made a huge difference if you compare it to other responses. So thank you so much, Salim. That was excellent. And people are asking, Siabonga and Tombela has asked, will this be available? Will the slides be available? Yes, there will be a recording of this and you will be able to look at it, because I'm sure when we finish listening to both of the presentations, we will, many people will appreciate these slides because they give us tools in terms of communication. Thank you very much. So let me introduce now once again Professor George Gao from Chinese CDC, absolutely well-known person in this field, and he is going to give his perspective of myths and how we would deal with them. So George, over to you.
Good morning for my South African friends and colleagues, and good afternoon for my Chinese colleagues and friends. It's my great pleasure to be here. Thanks, Helen, to introduce me. Thanks, Dr. Lee, Dr. Karim, and to organize this meeting together here. It's good, you know, since Dr. Karim already introduced something about the background of COVID-19. So I will focus on origin. So this is something that's really important for the infodemics. Everybody think, is this virus homemade? And is this the virus spillover or leakage from the lab? All these rumors and the infodemics are always there. So I will discuss something about the origins. Next slide, please. So why origins of SARS-CoV-2 matter? Why it's so important? Yeah, because it's related to the control of the current pandemic. If we know where the virus comes from, we will know, you know, how we can eradicate this virus. If they have multiple hosts, we might not be able to eradicate for the whole, you know, forever. So this is also something Dr. Karim mentioned. It's a flu-like, more or less. And second, it's important for the future, for the pre-warning, for any pandemic. So once we know the origin of this virus, we could learn a lesson. And the third, and we can get ourselves for the preparedness. So preparedness is very important, but in general, we are not there. Next slide, please. So have a look. I put this since 2002, when we first had the SARS-CoV. And after that, look at, we have so many new viruses emerging, including Ebola, MERS, H7N9, H5N1, pandemic H1N1, and hantavirus, and Rift Valley, Zika. You know, you can just name it. So many viruses. Like, you know, if you have any emerging viruses, it's not a surprise. It's just, you know, natural. So because we are living together with this virus. Next slide, please. You will see, you know, Dr. Karim will tell you it's a very serious moment. The next slide give you a very brief introduction about the coronavirus. So this is the coronavirus. You will see the coronavirus from so many animals. You know, you have the animals flying in the sky. You have the animals swimming in the water, seawater and the water. And you also have some animals carrying the coronavirus running in the land. So everywhere you have a coronavirus. The most important thing is the coronavirus has the characteristics of the recombination. That's very, very important. And so because the surface looks like, you know, crown. So this is what is called coronavirus. Next slide, please. And now, for all these rumors and misconceptions, people always think, you know, why we have got here? Why we have the pandemic? why we couldn't really get this disease out of the earth. So I was asked if this event is a black swan event or it's a great rhino event. Next slide, please. So I was a member. The next slide, please. GPMB. It's called Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. In our annual reports in 2019, we claimed in that annual report, flu and coronavirus and more might be the causative agent for the next pandemic. Next slide, please. But we are not prepared for the whole world. So this board is headed by the former WHO head and also Dr. Brundtland, and she is also the former Norwegian Prime Minister. Next slide, please. So why do we have COVID-19? I was invited in 2019, October 18th. I was in New York, was invited by the Gates Foundation and World Economy Forum and Johns Hopkins University. So there we have a table exercise. In this table exercise, we claim there is a disease emerging in Brazil, the disease called coronavirus associated pneumonia syndrome. Look at the name, CAPS. It's exactly like what we are experiencing at the moment, pandemic COVID-19. Next slide, please. So you some slide. I was there, so many people. We discussed how we can get this disease control. In that discussing, the conclusion is within 6 months we got pandemic. But this time, within this time less than half a year, only 2 or 3 months we got into the state for a pandemic. Next slide, please. I mentioned I wrote a review in 20 microbiology 2016. There, our conclusion is it is likely, not a matter of if, but when. The next recombinant coronavirus will emerge and cause another outbreak in the human population. So this is what I'm seeing for the professionals. It's really a great rhino event. Next slide, please. In 2018, I was invited to the journal Cell. Asked me to write something about emerging pathogens. I wrote something mentioned about disease X. There, I'm calling for the international surveillance. So what you can do, you can only invest in the basic research plus surveillance, international, global surveillance. Nothing else you can do. And get ourselves prepared. Next slide, please. If you look at, in general, we already have 7 human-infecting viruses. The first one, SARS. And move back, in 1965, you have called 229E. This is the first human-infecting coronavirus. Second one, 2 years later, 1967, OC43. Next one, please. And 204, you have H called L63. Before this time, we have all this, it's a politicized, and you cannot name the virus like L means Netherlands. The same year, Dr. K. Yuan in Hong Kong University, he isolated a virus called HK1, Hong Kong University. Before, we always name the virus by the name, the place where you isolate the virus. And move back, in 1995, you already have this virus, HK1, actually, found in Brazil. You look at the next one is MERS in 2012, and then you have COVID-19. So for COVID-19, like Dr. Rees mentioned, from the very beginning, we got the sample, we did the PCR because there are already some news in the internet claiming there might be some coronavirus around in Wuhan area. I heard all this news, we heard all the news. So this is why we set up all these primers, we designed everything, within 3 hours on the 2nd January last year, we got PCR positive, and then we got the whole genome sequencing, and then we isolated the virus on the 10th. On the 7th, we published this paper in the New England Journal of Medicine. Meanwhile, my colleagues from the Institute of Virology, Chinese Academy of Sciences, and also the Chinese Academy of Medical Sciences, we have so many group of people got the same results. It's a novel coronavirus. Next slide, please. And then on the 10th January, we shared this in the GISA. GISA, as everybody knows, a global initiative for sharing all influenza data. And also we published the genomes, everything in China CDC Weekly. This is our MMW-like journal. So 10th January, we shared everything. So I'm the one who coordinated all this sharing with Peter Wagner, who owned this GISA. Next slide, please. And Dr. Wang, and Peter Hoban, and Frederick Hayden, we wrote something like for the comment in the Lancet on January 24th, when we had 7 papers describing the epidemiology and the clinical plus treatment, all this work. We call it a novel coronavirus outbreak of global health concern. And on March 27th, I was interviewed by the Science Journal, like Dr. Karim mentioned about near Ferguson saying you need lockdown earlier. So even in March, still a lot of countries, they haven't done the lockdown. They haven't even encouraged the public to wear the mask. So I called in the Science Journal, okay, wearing the mask. Next slide, please. Yeah, like Dr. Karim already mentioned, then we have an epidemic problem. At the moment, actually, so many scientists were assaulted, including me, myself, and totally fortunate by the public, and people think. And the scientists created the virus. The scientists did a good job. We already did a brilliant job. To be honest, I should say, within 1 week, we got everything. Within 10 days, we shared everything, and Moderna, Pfizer, BioNTech already initiated their vaccine development because we have those sequences available in the GISA. Of course, I named this epidemic, the causative agent for the epidemic as infodemic. I use this word, information virus, infodemic. And with this infodemic means it's misinformation, information, they zip together to cause this epidemic. When you think very hard, so when you have this animal or zoonotic virus, usually you will see the patient 0. But if you move back, it's very difficult to see the intermediary host or even the natural host. At the moment, we believe bats are the reservoir hosts for the coronaviruses. And then you need a intermediary host, and then you find human beings. At the moment, we work so hard, we haven't found anything. Of course, then we ask, where is the COVID-19 from? So many theories, so many epidemics there. Bats and pangolin. If you look at all this, one of them from my colleague, actually, Dr. Shi Zheli, have a sequence of this virus, RATG13. 96.2% is identity with the COVID-19. People think, oh, here you go. This is the virus. So by then, that's not a virus. We know it's totally different from a COVID-19. So it's still a mystery. But what I would like to remind you about the influenza virus, origin of the influenza virus. Next slide, please. Influenza virus is always either, Robert Webster, who is a representative for the origin study of the influenza virus. Influenza virus is always in those seabirds or waterfalls. They carry all the different virus, and then they could spill over to chicken, and then chicken transmitted to pig, and pig transmitted to human beings. So this is a whole theory. Sometimes you got the chicken, the virus to infect human beings. That is the avian flu. Of course, in 2012, Ruben Donis, US CDC, they found influenza-like virus in the bats. So this is the cycle. This is the origin of the flu virus. So no one really blamed the virus from South Africa, China, US, or anywhere. The virus is from the waterfalls. The waterfalls, flying birds, they carry the virus, travel all over the world. So this is the origin of flu. Let's wait and see. Maybe one day we will get the answer for the COVID SARS-2. Next slide, please. Look at what we know about the coronavirus, like the natural host, intermediary host, and the terminal host for all these different kind of the coronavirus. NL63, 229E, OC43, HKU1, SARS-CoV-2, MERS-CoV. You know, previously we thought SARS-CoV is from, you know, civet cat. Now it looks like it's not a conclusive result. We need to go back and think very hard. And next slide, please. Of course, we already know MERS. It's so easy. We already know MERS is from bat, dromedary, and human beings. Next slide, please. And MERS, this is the first isolated virus, and the yellow picture, show the yellow picture here. Next slide, please. And then you saw it's like here. And after that, next slide, please. So many people work so hard, and including yellow case group. Next slide, please. They, you know, identify some sequences, and also KY isolate the sequence somewhere like HKU4, HKU5. It's so close to MERS. So coronavirus is everywhere. Next slide, please. Now, I want to remind you, it's very, very important for the coronavirus. For getting into the cell, they need to bind to the receptor. This is located the receptor, ACE2, for SARS and SARS-CoV-2. Next slide, please. Of course, we also, from my group, next slide, please. We find, you know, HKU4 is so easy to bind to the MERS DPP4 receptor or CD26. So we are expecting some more alpha virus to bind to the MERS receptor CD26. So this is the theory or the hypothesis how the MERS emerges. Next slide, please. Then you go back to study the MERS. They found in 2012, but move back. You can go on 2013 name. Starting is called EMC, HCOV EMC. Then go back 2 or 3. You already have something, you know, several samples positive. Go back, and then 1997 again from some sera is positive. Back, and even back to 1982. You see the origin of the virus. You need a serology work. You need a detector for the nucleic acid, for the genome. Next slide, please. Of course, you know, ACE2 is a receptor for the SARS-CoV-2. You could in my group, we quickly, early January, we already defined, you know, it's a share with the SARS-2, the same receptor. Next slide, please. Of course, we already know the animals, so many animals. Look at those animals in the blue area, they carry all these SARS. Their receptor ACE2 can bind to this, and also will be found from natural infection of these animals. Next slide, please. Of course, you know, whenever you are talking about this SARS-CoV-2, and we also want to come back to say so whether or not we have a related virus. Next slide, please. Give you an example. RATT13. They also used human ACE2, but with very low binding capacity. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. You already saw this. They're very similar. And Preparedness coronavirus. They also use the human ACE2. What we know, all those viruses, they share the common character by using the same receptor, but they are not the same virus. Next slide, please. Yeah, now we know SARS-CoV-2, Preparedness virus. Next slide, please. And plus RATT13. You know, this blue area show you the receptor usage. The red one show you they wouldn't use those animals receptor. So this is a paper, probably the Apple Journal with the cover story. I encourage you to go and read that. It's a scientist. Next slide, please. Yeah, I look at all the studies for all this. We recently wrote a paper in the Lancet. So for the HK1, first report in 2004. Next slide, please, very quickly. And then go back to 2001 and 1996, 1995 in Brazil. You know, you always can easily to go there. Let's think about HIV. HIV was first found in 1982. 2 years later, you isolate the virus, named the AIDS. In 1983, where you go back to 1959, and then even earlier, people think it's this virus. So origin definitely is a scientific question, need to be answered. Next slide, please. So this is something we mentioned about also the severe fever with thrombocytosis syndrome virus. It was first found in 2009, but when you move back, that was in China, and we found in China even come back 2 years earlier. Next slide, please. Move back to 1998, 1996. Even 1996, you already have some serological positive samples. Next slide, please. Now, so recently we wrote a paper in the Lancet, calling for the origin of the. Don't believe those infodemic. Don't believe those rumors. Let's come back for the science. And we also wrote something in the cell research called Tracing the Origins of SARS-CoV-2 Lessons Learned from the Past. As you know, like yesterday, recently, Dr. Francis Collins, and he also wrote something in the NIH webpage claiming, we need time to get out of SARS-CoV-2. It's not homemade, man-made virus. Let's come back to science. Next slide, please. While we are working so hard, and then the virus itself expands its host territory. Look at it. That yellowish shadow picture says we are the isolated virus or PCR positive or serologic positive from those animals. And the lower picture shows you that blue shadowed picture show you all those so many people did a lab effective experiment. So what we already know, it's really so many species they can infect the virus. Next slide, please. So this is something that tells you with different kind of virus figures. I published in Lancet, but the Lancet only published as a comment. They didn't put this figure, but that's basically what I told you about those different kind of virus for the origin. Last slide, please. Okay. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Karim, also have our ambassador, Dr. Lee, and also Dr. Rees, and so many, politicians, South African scientists here in China and South Africa. We like to work together. Let's work together to get the virus done, not get our done. Otherwise, the viruses will work together to conquer us. Let's work together. Thank you. Solidarity.
No, thank you very much. Again, I think that, and it's very good to see you and hear from you as well, but I think that this is incredibly helpful and the two talks were very complementary. I mean, I mentioned earlier on, Professor Gao was involved with Ebola and the West African outbreak, as was I, in a number of meetings. And I would say certainly that we were not prepared. And I was part of a committee for WHO that evaluated preparedness under international health regulations with Ebola. We were nowhere near as prepared and were able to respond as rapidly to Ebola then, and that was only 2014, as we were now, as you said. And I'd also remember, I mentioned CEPI, that Professor Gao and I both are working with, having a meeting of their scientific committee in February when we first saw this virus, and discussing whether CEPI funds vaccine development. And they've been funding development of vaccines ready for what we call pathogen or disease X. That's the pandemic virus in this case, that we don't know what it's going to be. And early on in the pandemic, we actually had a discussion, and I don't think anyone still believed that we were going to get a pandemic. But I do distinctly remember someone saying then, and I know who it was, he said, just in case, let's invest some money, let's do a dry run in developing vaccines. And little did we know, but I do think that this has been a huge wake-up call for the world. So with that, I'm going to go to, we've got questions coming in already, and I'm looking on the, if you'd like to put your questions in the Q&A, I'm keeping an eye on the chat, but the Q&A is where we'd like to see the questions. And I'd like to bring those through first of all. So Kevin Brandt from Eyewitness News, to Slim, what's your view on teenagers? There's a lot of debate around this issue.
Thank you very much for that question, Kevin. So we know that children, especially in the group we're talking about here, who are teenagers, have a very low risk of getting severe disease when they are exposed to the virus. But they do get exposed and they do get infected, and often it's asymptomatic. We are now better, we have a better understanding that even with mild disease and asymptomatic infections, we still see long COVID. And long COVID is a new entity we're trying to come to grips with. You know, I've got several patients in my clinic with this problem, and I mean, the way they describe this brain fog and how they can't concentrate. So it's not a condition we want, you know, large numbers of our teens to have. But also, by vaccinating teens, we're not only trying to do so for their individual benefit, but we're also trying to reduce the risk that they get infected, and when infected, that they are infectious for a shorter period. So in other words, their risk of transmitting the infection will be lower. It'll be lower because they get infected less, and when they do get infected, they are infectious for a much shorter period. So there's an overall community benefit to vaccinating young people. So I agree that once we've saturated the individuals in the older age groups, particularly in the above 60, it makes sense, if there's vaccines available, to continue vaccinating down to the teens. I should just point out that it should remain all our first priority is to improve our vaccination coverage in the 60 plus. That should remain our highest priority in the vaccination program.
Thank you. Louise van Heerden, Professor Gao, I'm going to share this question. She's referring to an ENCA reference, talking about in China that schools are being closed and as China fights a new outbreak. Perhaps the extension from that, China's ambition, what is China's current ambition? Because it was so effective early on in shutting things down. Now, what is the response, and what would the aim be? I think that the other side of this is people talking about, is it possible to eradicate? And I think that's, is it eradicate? Do we live with it? What are we going to do? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. You know, I was asked, you know, from time to time, but what's a strategy China would do eventually? So you look at what China have been done. From the very beginning, when we had the first outbreak in Wuhan, we tried to use a lockdown. The lockdown works. Really, if you use the word, if you put China as the only country who has the disease, if you put, and then you see, we eradicated the virus by May last year. We didn't have any more viruses because from time to time, and then we have so many viruses imported from other countries, as you know, we can always do the molecular epidemiology to do the sequencing analysis to see where the virus come from, how the virus so close, the closest cousins or sisters or brothers, where they are from. So this is why we have a dynamic strategy. And after the lockdown in Wuhan, we succeeded so well. Unfortunately, the virus becomes, the disease is a pandemic. And then we have imported cases. But China, until now, we have been doing so well with so-called zero COVID or zero clearance. So zero clearance still works in China at the moment. We don't have any local transmission until you have a new imported cases. Until you have a new imported virus, then we'll have, in general, for the last almost 1 year and 10 months, we are counting, we have 40-ish outbreaks with local transmission from imported cases. So foresee the future. I think at least we save the time. We save the time because this zero COVID strategy, we have enough vaccines. As you know, in China, we already have 2.2 billion doses. And you are talking about 1.1 persons. We have 1.4 in total already vaccinated. We already been vaccinated. That's a very good figure, and that will help us because we save the time until we have so many vaccines. I think we are thinking what's the next strategy we should do. We save the time. We also save the life. Think about the death cases in China. It's very, very low. I could use the word extremely low. Think about this pandemic. Think about this, devastating virus. So we are discussing what we should do in the future. we don't have the conclusion yet. At least at the moment, we are still doing zero COVID. And under our system, we can still tolerate with this zero COVID. Of course, in my opinion, if we want to open the border, if we want to change this strategy, in addition to all the technology preparedness and policy or political preparedness, we also need psychological preparedness from the public. I.e., there's something we usually discuss about the public resilience. Public resilience is also very important. So it's a quite complicated case, and we need to really count every aspect, and then we will have a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are a couple of questions that are kind of alluding to the same thing, which I'll put back to Slim. So one is from Tsepo Majake, who's saying, how do we persuade people to see the light in terms of the need to vaccinate and accepting the supremacy of scientific thought? And then Gerard Wright is asking, have we done enough to communicate the importance of just staying healthy more generally? And what do we do around vaccine hesitancy? So I think both of those are alluding to how do we tackle the misinformation that is affecting people's willingness to get vaccination?
Yes, thanks for those questions. I think it's quite important. I mean, while our country has been through 3 waves, people like Professor Rees and myself, we are now dealing with the 5th wave. The first wave was to deal with all the people who were hesitant and anti-measures around lockdowns and masks. Then we had to deal with those that called us, Dr. Death. There were many articles about that when we recommended that schools should open. Then we dealt with the 3rd wave, which was about chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine. Then we dealt with the 4th wave, which was about ivermectin. And now we're dealing with the 5th wave, which is about vaccine hesitancy. I think in all of these waves, I have found that it's a mixed bag. There are some individuals who are just genuinely misinformed. They haven't been able to grasp the full extent of the information. They've received information from sources they trust that's not accurate. And so, they're well-meaning, but there's a small group that's often not well-meaning. They are driven by whatever agendas they have. Some of it, pecuniary, some of it not. I don't know all of it. But I've taken the basic approach that our task as scientists, and I'd like Professor Rees to comment as well, because she does this very effectively. Our task as scientists is to put the information out there for people to see. We're not trying to convince you. We're just trying to tell you the conclusions we've come to. You need to come to your own conclusion. The evidence is there. Take it as you wish. Now, often we ask our opinion, so we'll add an opinion, but our primary goal is educational. So I think that I've just taken that as a fundamental approach. I mean, we're good to hear from Professor Rees and from Professor Gao how they've been dealing with it.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Slim. I think that many people are uncertain. And it has struck me very strongly in the recent weeks how accepting the world was and welcoming of a malaria vaccine versus the really profound uncertainty that's been attached to COVID vaccines. And I think it's something that we could reflect on. I mean, one of the things that as a tactic that I have learned to use, and we had the same problem with AIDS denialism, is that if you're put into a room with somebody who is countering science, but putting what sound like very cohesive views forward, and you're meant to counter, and very often we would come second. So the counter view would come first, the non-science-based would come first, be powerfully put, and now you explain it, try and back foot. I don't think that is the way that we should actually explain science. I think what we do is to work out what our position is, understand the scientific position, and just continue to share that, but not engage necessarily in the specifics of the microchip in the vaccine. Because once you do that, you get distracted into the misinformation. What we need to do repeatedly is like cracked records and continue to try to learn to do it better, communicate to the public. Professor Gao, George, what would your view be on this?
Yeah, I do agree, like your last word, communication. So communication is the key. I mean, the same thing in China. You always have someone in the internet. They thought they are expert. They are like, they are really counter science. So I mean, they didn't have any basis, but they are discussing something about maybe they just overheard someone who got vaccinated, got some side effect, or something like that, and then they like to exaggerate something. As a scientist, I keep being interviewed, tell people, where's the truth of the science? What is the fact? What is the truth? So sometimes you have the fact is not the truth. I try to explain to the people, science, truth, and fact, what's the relationship? So somehow, in my opinion, because of this communication, we need to encourage the scientists or public health workers, try to encourage them to really try to disseminate those science there. In general, it's everywhere. That's a problem. So keep communicating with the public. I think we will be the winner. The science will be the owner. More importantly, so you have to tell the people, we really can't get the answer from the science. If you think back, a century ago, when you have the 1918 Spanish flu, we even at that time, we even didn't know what it is. Try to do this one. Again, communicating is key.
Thank you. And perhaps as a last comment, I'll give you both a question as a last answer, if it could be brief, because we're running towards the end of the hour. But to Professor Gao, first of all, building on that, you gave an excellent overview of the evolution of these viruses and jumping from animal reservoirs to humans and how that has been recorded as happening. Is it useful, do you think, for us to try and communicate the potential for that to happen in the future, the potential for future pandemics, or is that counterproductive because people won't accept it or won't listen to it? Or is this something we should be trying to explain, that there is potential and how this could happen? You're obviously being very involved in that.
Yeah, I think with all this my slide, everything is clear. As I said, coronaviruses is everywhere. Some birds flying and animals running, and the mammals or any sea mammals or sea animals, they are swimming there. My conclusion is we are expecting another, maybe it's not pandemic, at least could be epidemic like SARS, or there could be a kind of flu-like virus like what we have already, OL63, 229E, or with endemic like the MERS. Definitely we'll have another COVID, say 30 or COVID something, or another HCO. Let's name it. So by then, I think people will believe, well, you're right. You have all this coronavirus everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. And last question for a brief answer from you, Salim. What would you say would be the most important lessons learned at this time for the African region in terms of preparedness for future pandemics?
I think firstly, we've seen how, horseshoe bats have thousands of coronaviruses. So I don't think we are in any situation to be complacent or comfortable. We saw, prior to the initial SARS-CoV-1, we've had 4 circulating coronaviruses, and we've had several that humans have encountered even before that are in our genes. And we've seen how from 2002 with SARS-CoV-1, in 2013, we get MERS, which is another horseshoe bat coronavirus. And now we are in SARS-CoV-2, also a virus, a coronavirus from horseshoe bat. So we have to expect we're going to see many more. And I think if it's not going to be coronaviruses, it'll be other respiratory infections like influenza. So we have to be prepared. And I think for me, it has been a singular lesson, especially as somebody who spent the early 1990s helping South Africa prepare for flu pandemic, and which never came. And so we became complacent. There's no room for complacency. Prepare, prepare, prepare.
Thank you. And so excellent presentations and real food for thought. And I'm very pleased that this has been recorded, so that I'm certainly going to use this to talk particularly to healthcare workers, because they are one of our most important conduits for communication. So I think that some of the takeaway lessons, I think we have to accept there's an infodemic, and there's also deliberate misinformation that is being put out there. But as scientists, I think it is up to us, A, to generate the science and to invest in the science. And one of the things that we've seen in response to this pandemic, even previously, is a lack of investment, particularly in low middle income countries. So the investment in science, we've seen a huge investment in China, for example, in vaccine development. We do need to invest, and we need to invest in all continents of the world, because if we don't have the answers, we can't give proper information. And I think the other thing we have to think about and accept, and I think Professor Gao has said this, there's science and there's communication, but then there's truth. And sometimes science gives us one answer today, as we saw with ivermectin, optimism, look like there might be something. And then moving on, that answer falls away. So I think that we're also going to have to be prepared as scientists for the fact that scientific truth in an emergency will shift very rapidly, and we're going to have to keep interpreting and explain those changes to people. So communication is critical, and perhaps one of the things that this has taught all of us is the importance of science communication to the layperson, and how probably we haven't been good enough at this. The second thing that has really struck me, particularly listening to the response from China to trying to contain outbreaks, is that in fact, when we look back on this historically, we're not necessarily going to say there was only one way to do this. We saw the reflection from the UK. We're seeing New Zealand's response, unique because it's an island. We've seen how China has tried to continue to isolate and control. And we saw what South Africa had tried to do very early on. And we are going to have to look back and say, are there some generic lessons learned or not? And because some of these lessons learned about how we respond, we need to take forward into the future. And that also includes the science of how we respond. And the third thing, I think, which is so important, which has come out from this discussion, is this issue of global solidarity. I am not frightened about the fact that as scientists, clinicians, that we won't always agree, that there'll be times where we have huge uncertainties with opinions dominating what the interpretation is, and that the science will take us further forward. But to have that debate is incredibly important. And the debate is the thing that I want to really encourage the academies to do, because what is not helpful is for people to throw bricks at each other. In an emergency, we should all be in the same house, differing views, differing science, interpreting and coming up as much as we can with consensus, so that we can then A, design the responses appropriately, and B, also communicate to the public. So with that, I'd like to say a huge thank you to those absolutely fantastic presenters that we've had. We are on the hour just after, but I would ask Professor Himla Sudyal, would you like to make a few final words as we close?
Thank you, Professor Rees, and to Professor Salim Karim and Professor Gao. Very, very inspirational and encouraging presentations. I mean, I know you have spent many, many days, if you were to count all the hours you've had to engage with media and other responses. And it is because of participation of the likes of yourselves, making available your time to engage with the wide community, which is the general public, including scientific fora, you have been able to package the so-called jargon of the science into sound bites that make it meaningful to those of us in the general public. And we really, really appreciate all you do on a daily basis to bring science into our living rooms. Even though I know that sometimes you are hit by many challenging things from the media, other scientists, etc. I particularly like your closing statements, Professor Rees, about the role that scientists need to play and the fact that we owe it to use science as a portal to be able to contribute to the betterment of society in view of the global solidarity that you've talked about. I think we've had many lessons from today's engagement, and it brings together the kind of international view in the way we have responded in our different countries to the pandemic, and how we should continue, as Professor Gao said, working together to bring about this kind of commonality of dealing with challenges as a global society for the betterment of all living individuals across the globe. I'm very, very grateful to all of you who have presented and participated. I know it's a Friday and I know we have time differences between us and China, so I'm very, very appreciative for all of you who have stayed with us, and in particular, our presenters who I know are very, very busy, and for you to take your time out and share that time with us, to inspire us, to challenge us to be better humans is really, really a gift that we all will treasure going forward. I would also like to use this platform. My colleague Stanley has posted something on the chat to acknowledge the generosity of the Chinese embassy in donating some masks to us, which we recently distributed to a deserving community at a clinic in Mamelodi. So thank you very, very much for that. Everybody was very, very appreciative of that donation. And yeah, and also to Dan, thank you so much for your support as always, and always being there to encourage us to remain truthful and honest in our international engagement with collegiality and with transparency. And to one and all, I want to finally extend once again a very, very happy occasion for us to have had an opportunity finally for ASSAf to have an opportunity to host this embassy lecture series. And perhaps to our colleagues at the embassy, we should try to make this an annual event. So that's our challenge. Let's try to do this. And thank you all once again. Have a good day going forward. Bye for now.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, and appreciation to all the speakers. Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye.